Good afternoon and welcome to Grace and Gavel. I am Buffy. I've started a true crime podcast, and essentially there's two things that a lot of true crime podcasts neglect or don't have. First of all, as a person who is schooled in legal theory and understands how things work, I'm actually a practicing attorney. I am a practicing attorney. I've been an attorney for almost 18 years now, practicing criminal law. So there are things you won't hear from me, such as he was let off by a technicality. Technicality is another word for I don't really know, but he was let off for some reason that I can't discern. And then also, I think another thing that a lot of true crime podcasts are kind of getting wrong is the idea of compassion for the victims that are in the case. They're not just characters in a play. I mean, there are people who lost their lives and had family members and were loved and missed, and a lot of that. Even if it's historic cases, you have to kind of think about that. So today we're starting off with a historic case, the People versus Bruno Hauptmann. This is about the Lindbergh Kidnapping. March 1st, 1932, America's golden couple puts their baby to bed. By morning, the crib is empty. A ladder outside the window, a ransom note on the sill, and a nation gripped by fear. The crime would be called the trial of the century. But did they truly find the man who did it, or just the one who fit the story? And ultimately, that's a really good question because, especially back then, things were a lot different than they are today. A big difference is the fact of the Miranda case, which required the police to not be as brutal, which required people to let them know what their rights were, because many people were used to, conversing with police officers, and it wasn't anything to, talk to them like you would a normal person on the street. But the stakes were often much higher too. Before Miranda, people were able to be beaten to a pulp, to be essentially threatened and abused with the idea that if they said that they did something, they could potentially go home. That was their thought. Now, was that actually going to happen? Probably not. Hey everyone, I'm Buffy, and this is Grace and Gavel, where we meet crime through a lens of reason, humanity, and the law. Tonight we're analyzing one of the most infamous cases in American history, the kidnapping and murder of the Lindbergh baby. We'll look at the facts, the suspects, the prosecution, the defense, and the legacy of a case that shaped modern criminal law. The crime that shook America. Charles Lindbergh wasn't just a man. In 1927, he flew solo across the Atlantic and became the world's hero. He and his wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, were young, wealthy, and adored. The Kennedys before the Kennedys. Their 20-month-old son, Charles Jr., was America's baby. But on the evening of March 1st, 1932, inside their Hopewell, New Jersey estate, the Lindbergh nurse went to check on the baby and found the crib empty. A crudely built wooden ladder leaned against the nursery window. A ransom note demanded $50,000 for the child's return. Within hours, local police, the New Jersey State Police, and the FBI descended on the property. Newspapers called it the crime of the century. The investigation and ransom. Colonel Norman Schwarzkopf, father of the Gulf War general, led the investigation. The Lindberghs began receiving ransom letters, 14 in total, all in the same handwriting, same misspellings, same mysterious symbol of overlapping circles and holes. Negotiations were mediated by Dr. John Condon, a Bronx school teacher who placed coded ads in the newspaper as JAFC. On April 2nd, 1932, Condon delivered $50,000 in gold certificates to a man in the Bronx who called himself John. 2 months later, on May 12th, a truck driver discovered a decomposed body of a child in a wooded area not far from the Lindbergh home. The skull was fractured. The child had likely died the night of the kidnapping. The break in the case. For over 2 years, the case went cold. until 1934, when a gas station attendant noted a gold certificate with a serial number matching the ransom money. It led police to Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a 35-year-old German carpenter living in the Bronx. In his garage, detectives found $14,000 of the ransom money hidden behind a board. Hauptmann claimed the cash belonged to a deceased friend, but investigators also found wood in his attic matching the same grain pattern as the ladder used in the kidnapping. The public wanted closure, and they got it. Hauptmann was arrested, charged with kidnapping and murder, and held without bail. The trial of the century. The 1935 trial in Flemington, New Jersey, drew crowds across the country. Reporters packed the courthouse. Radio stations broadcast updates hourly. The prosecution built a circumstantial case. Ransom bills found in Hauptmann's possession. Handwriting analysis matching the ransom notes. And ultimately, you think about handwriting analysis. In some ways, it almost seems like it's kind of a pseudoscience, just because I don't know how they do it, because I don't think there are a lot of people who consistently write a certain way. And if you're in stress and maybe you're trying to disguise your handwriting, it can be really difficult. And that's why right now there's a lot of things that hinge on like Daubert and things that can actually be proven and actually show proof rather than conjecture, which is really important in a court of law. We don't want to be tried on, I'm pretty sure that that's his handwriting. No, we want to be tried on that is absolutely their handwriting. And some of these things seem a little bit kind of far-fetched in some ways. Also, the wood grain evidence linking his attic to the ladder. So the thing about the matching ransom notes, that's a little bit suspect in some ways, especially because I don't know the essential training of the person that did the handwriting analysis. We don't know how thorough it was. We don't know. The other thing you think about is when you're dealing with celebrities and you're dealing with the death of a child, there's often like a higher stake placed on that. And there can be pressure to succumb to what the crime victims want. And so, especially with the Lindberghs being like the future Kennedys before the Kennedys, I mean, you think about this, and then the crime of the century. I mean, there's all this hype and almost urgency to get this settled. Like, could that have impacted the case in any way? And then the wood grain evidence, I mean, we don't have a lot of facts on that. So it could be a scenario where, I mean, they don't just sell one piece of that wood. I mean, there's multiple people. But I mean, it is a little bit more convincing, the fact that the ladder was a similar pattern, sure. But is that conclusive? I mean, how many people at that time like built their own ladders? I mean, that's the other questions that we don't really have the answers to. And it also makes you wonder, like, it does sound a lot very circumstantial with the bills. The bills, not so much, because if they found the serial number, I think that would be kind of conclusive. But I would want to know, I mean, did he live near the building? Like, live near where they lived? Did he talk to people about it? I mean, what exactly happened? The defense argued it was all coincidence and prejudice against an immigrant, which xenophobia was definitely big back then. I mean, we're thinking of 1935. I mean, he was German. I mean, issues with the Nazis and World War II. I mean, there was a lot of kind of stuff going on there. No fingerprints were found on the ladder, notes, or nursery. The other thing you kind of think about is maybe the person wore gloves. I don't know if they would have known to wear gloves back then. Additionally, you think about the fact that, I mean, would they have interpreted fingerprints? Because that would have been a long, slow, tedious process for sure. Hauptmann never confessed, not even when offered a reduced sentence, which definitely makes you think that maybe he actually was innocent of this. I mean, we are not guilty of this. I can't say innocent, can say not guilty. On February 13th, 1935, after 11 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty. He was executed by electric chair on April 3rd, 1936, still proclaiming his innocence. So let's talk about the theories and the legal lens here. So the facts we know: the baby was abducted from a second-story nursery. What I think is interesting about that is that the person knew where the baby was located. So could it have been someone that they knew rather than some German immigrant who maybe had just moved into the States? You think about that. There was a ransom note left on the windowsill. Multiple ransom communications followed, 14, I believe they said, which is a lot. So this person was clearly looking to get some sort of payment. I mean, was it someone maybe that Lindbergh knew, or had in his circle who was upset with him for some reason, or upset with his wife for some reason, or whatever reason? The child was found dead nearby. So essentially they think that the child had been kidnapped and then murdered, unfortunately. But they did trace the ransom money to Hauptmann, which is kind of, another thing too that you think about. But here's our unknowns and our controversies. There's no direct physical evidence tying Hauptmann to the crime scene, which would be really important. When you think about that, it wasn't an era in which DNA was widespread. So it's not like he hid the evidence or, kept his fingerprints away or did any of that. There's no fingerprints, no eyewitness confirmation, which generally oftentimes doesn't happen. Especially the cover of darkness, especially those times, especially the wealthiness of the Lindberghs would make it more of a private environment. Some ransom bills appeared in circulation after his arrest. So that's also another fact that makes you think he could potentially be innocent, or did he have an accomplice and he had given that accomplice some of those notes as payment for helping him? You kind of wonder about that. Can a person actually pull that off with just one, or would he need an accomplice? The ladder construction matched his wood, but grain analysis in 1935 was primitive, as we talked about. There's a lot of tools that they didn't have. And so theory one is a lone wolf, which would be Hauptmann. Hauptmann acted alone, opportunistically targeting the Lindberghs for ransom. His motivation, of course, was financial desperation during the Great Depression. So, that's a good motive, but ultimately there's a reason in the law that motive is not necessarily required. Because, you can find a motive for anything. Even you don't know a person off the street what they're doing, and you say, oh, well, that person clearly needs money, so that's why they did it. It's almost that pressure to try to figure out why someone did something. And sometimes there's no why. Theory two is an inside job. Servants or workers at the Lindbergh estate, which there you go, there's an answer to one of our questions, leaked details about the child's location. Some believe the real kidnapper had inside help and Hauptmann was really the drop man, meaning the scapegoat. Which would make sense because, the fact that they knew where the child was, that they had said, so it may have been more of a conspiracy kind of thing where multiple people were involved, and maybe it was a scenario where, Charles Lindbergh, being the famous man that he was, invited some people that he probably shouldn't have trusted into his inner circle, and that's what happened. Not blaming him, not victim shaming him, not doing any of that, but just saying sometimes we don't know who we don't know, and we don't know who's dangerous and who's not. And that's just walking on the streets even too. You think about that. We don't know who's safe and who's not. Theory three is an organized ring. Evidence of coded notes and multiple ransoms suggests a kidnapping ring, possibly including figures in organized crime. So you think about that. That was the time when, Prohibition had kind of been around and there was a lot of crime activity and such in that era, which could definitely be very possible. Also, there's a theory that Hauptmann was actually wrongfully convicted. Post-trial reviews question whether police misconduct, which we talked a lot about that before the Miranda. This wasn't before Miranda. So, rights weren't given, obviously there was abuse and things like that. He still didn't, he still didn't confess to what he had done. He still proclaimed his innocence, but still there would have been a lot of xenophobia. We talked about being the German immigrant right around the time after the Second World War. Media pressure. I think that that's a big one. Probably less so then than now, because now it's I remember hearing about the Menendez brothers and their case. They had wall-to-wall hourly coverage on them, what they said, what they didn't say, what their circumstance was everything you can imagine, so it wasn't that much pressure at the time as compared to now, but you imagine the cameras and all of that going, and the famousness of of the parents. I mean, especially the father. So essentially, this case gave rise to federal jurisdiction for kidnapping. Congress passed the Federal Kidnapping Act of 1932 and entitled it the Lindbergh Law, making interstate abduction a federal crime. And for those of you that don't know, federal crimes are a lot more serious than state crimes, and federal crimes are a lot more difficult to be able to get a not guilty verdict, which is why they're a huge deal. And ultimately, things have gotten a lot more kind of locked in certain ways. For instance, you think about that's how they get all the people who are involved in the mafia. They use the vehicle of the RICO, the racketeering and all of that, because that's generally what they're doing. They're doing gambling and other illegal activities. It also transformed rules for ransom tracking, evidence, chain of custody, and media ethics in criminal trials. So let's reflect on some of this. The Lindbergh baby case became America's first media circus. It exposed how fame, fear, and politics can fuse into pressure for justice, even if justice is uncertain. Whether Hauptmann was guilty or not, one truth remains. The public's thirst for closure can outweigh its patience for truth. And in law, as in life, that imbalance costs lives. The other thing you need to think about is there is this quote that says, "It's better one guilty man go free than one innocent man be prosecuted for a crime he didn't commit." I'm Buffy, and this was Grace and Gavel, The People versus Bruno Hauptmann. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and seek the full story. A nation's hero, a missing child, or rushed conviction. Did justice prevail in the Lindbergh baby case, or was America's trial of the century a tragic miscarriage of justice? Listen to Grace and Gavel, and stay tuned because we have another episode dropping shortly about this Springfield 3. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.